Well, welcome to the program, Michael. I'm really looking forward to chatting today.
G'day, Simon. Excited to be here.
I always ask the first question, Michael, is how did you come to Treasury and why did you choose Treasury as your career?
Yeah, good question. So, it might make sense to sort of talk about how my career came together before addressing the Treasury point. But I guess my career started out as a banking graduate at Macquarie, specifically in one of their funds at the time, known as Macquarie Airports. Macquarie Airports had a controlling interest in a number of airports, of which Sydney Airport was one of them. And my role at the time was actually helping manage the airport investment, specifically working on the airport's refinancings, which is part of where I got my interest in Treasury from, developing business cases, running the consolidated airport and Sydney Airport valuation models, helping draft board papers, amongst other things. And a few years in, actually, Macquarie Airports, or the Macquarie Airports Fund, was spun off from Macquarie Group, and the business renamed itself to MAP Airports. And when that transition happened, I continued to manage Sydney Airport, but also the consolidated group as well. And fast forward a bit of history, MAP Airports, the renamed MAP Airports at the time, swapped its stakes in its remaining airports, being Copenhagen and Brussels, for 100% of Sydney Airport. And when that happened, our European office dissolved, and the people working in the Sydney office basically transferred into the Sydney Airport business itself in various teams. And that's where I joined the Treasury team. Part of it was because I was super interested in Treasury, and part of it was because I actually had a lot of experience working on all the refinancings that Sydney Airport was actually doing back in the Macquarie Airports and the MAP Airport days. So in terms of Treasury specifically, what attracted me to it, I guess, well, it's a very strategic, technical and complex function. There's so much to know and so much to understand in order to make highly effective decisions. I guess in the Sydney Airport context, it involves completing a few major debt raising transactions a year, which is something that really excites and motivates me. It's a highly impactful and a high responsibility function where you can really add significant value, especially during the coronavirus pandemic, right? Because Treasury was a key player in helping, currently is a key player in helping keep our business in the air during these unprecedented times. And I think in terms of Treasury, it's very much a relationship-driven function, both internally and externally. I guess focusing on externally, so strong relationships can literally mean hundreds of millions of dollars more funding, or if you say 1 basis point of margin, it can literally save the company hundreds of thousands of dollars in interest a year. So it's a very, very, I guess, critical and significant function. And that's that plus all the other things are what particularly attracted me to Treasury.
And so you've really just had one job then, haven't you? You started with Macquarie on the grad program, and it's just seen its way through to become treasurer at Sydney Airports.
Exactly. Sydney Airport was something that I was looking at and managing throughout my entire career. So when people think, oh, how did your role change going from Macquarie to Sydney Airport? The role didn't really change apart from me joining the actual Treasury team itself, even though I was working on Treasury transactions. But there were obviously differences in culture, and that was the key differentiator. I guess working at an investment bank, some of those stereotypes are kind of true in that the majority of people there are really driven, ambitious, high achievers, really great technical skills, working extremely hard to deliver outcomes. But I guess when I joined Sydney Airport, whilst I was working on the same type of thing, there was much more focus on work-life balance at the time. So working on the weekends, working late nights was very much the exception rather than the rule. And that was one thing that took some time getting used to, coming from a really fast-paced environment. But I guess things have changed, in fact, in terms of us moving to the other end of the spectrum again, in that we've made some really fresh hires that are super driven and have really upped our capability across the organization. So I guess the cultural difference was something that required me getting used to, but I guess right now I think we're sort of evolving ourselves into a more high capability, function and business and team, really able to fire the afterburners to get some things done under pressure.
Now, you've just been through some quite, a lot of firsts really, specifically around some sustainability linked bonds. Talk us through what that process was and what you got away.
Yeah, so I guess by way of background, so Sydney Airport was the first Australian airport to report on sustainability in 2014. So since 2014, we've established a really dedicated sustainability team and have a really comprehensive sustainability strategy. And one thing that we were trying to do is find, additional ways to demonstrate our commitment to sustainability. And not only that, but to also embed sustainability across our key business sort of decisions, rather than having that sustainability function sit off to one side as a disconnected sort of function doing their own thing. So one of the things I thought of, speaking to our banks as well, is to potentially look into sustainable financing. And there's a number of sustainable financing products out there. There were, a number of years ago, there were green bonds and green loans, gathering momentum, that they were trending, they were all the rage. But those products required you to use the proceeds from them to fund specifically or refinance green investment. And for an airport like us, a couple of solar panels, some electric buses doesn't really add up in the context of us wanting to raise hundreds of millions of dollars. So we looked at these new products, sustainability linked bonds and sustainability linked loans, because they were more appropriate for us to consider. And what those products involve is that the margin or the interest rate or the coupon on those instruments, the sustainability linked bond and loan instruments, actually moves up and down, or can move up and down, depending on the company's sustainability performance over time, based on either some predetermined internal metrics or based on an external rating. And we went with an external rating because it opens up the opportunity to deliver additional performance across the entire ESG spectrum, rather than maybe focusing on one or two targets. And so process-wise, we thought we should look into those products. We started off with a normal bond and loan process. And we decided to bolt on these sustainability elements, just to make sure that the discount and the premium that those products can provide weren't really priced in by banks at the time. It kind of gets you nowhere that way. So we start off with a normal process. We bolted on the sustainability sort of element, and we managed to get a deal, an Australian first done in terms of our sustainability linked loan, and a global first in terms of our sustainability linked bond. Got them done even before ICMA published their sustainability linked bond specific principles. So both very successful transactions. It helped move the market forward, as well as delivering some of our airport specific objectives.
And you've won quite a few awards on the back of it, Michael. Talk us through those.
A few awards, which is always great, especially because, it was kind of an internally generated idea. And, the Treasury team was involved from conception all the way to execution. So it's good to get that recognition. So we've won awards from, Kanga News, Finance Asia, like a number of Treasury specific or industry specific bodies. And that's that recognition is great, because, many people internally and externally don't really know so much about the sustainability linked bonds and the sustainability linked loans. So it's good to see the industry players really provide that recognition. It's awesome.
Now, I'm fascinated to ask, coronavirus has affected a lot of businesses, but not that many like the airline industries. How have you found things over the last few months, Michael?
They've been challenging. So finger on the pulse, many sleepless nights. From a Treasury standpoint, it's all about making sure that we have enough liquidity to get through these times. Our passenger performance has gone from, X% growth to actually 95+% down. So that was an interesting thing to sort of work through. So from a Treasury perspective, it was all about making sure we had the right liquidity. So that meant for us specifically, aside from those loan and bond transactions, we needed to move fast. Although we had a lot of liquidity, we put ourselves in a really great position to get through the pandemic. We decided to move really, really fast and actually borrow another $850 million from our banking group in only 2 weeks. So it has been, and it still is, just a lot of hard work, a lot of scenario analysis, and just making sure that we've got enough cash in the absence of passengers flying in and around the airport.
You've had a great career to date. What are the things that stand out for you as being some of the biggest achievements in your career thus far?
So I guess going above and beyond to deliver that Australian first sustainability linked loan and the world first sustainability linked bond, I guess, from conception to close. I think that was great. Just generally being part of the airport's evolution from an infant to a mature treasury. So strengthening our balance sheet across a number of debt, derivative and equity transactions, that was really pleasing. just taking control of that, having become treasurer and helping shape our balance sheet. That was particularly satisfying. And I guess generally just becoming treasurer at the age of 30.
I was about to say, you were a very young treasurer, Michael. So it was 30,
yeah.
was it?
Yeah. So that was particularly awesome, one of Australia's largest corporate borrowers, but, becoming treasurer was great, but then also being given the full autonomy to sort of think of ideas and lead transactions without advisors, without people internally holding my hand or pushing me around. It was particularly pleasing to sort of put the treasury space on my back and my team's back and just work with the team really closely to just deliver solid outcomes, having just become treasurer at 30. It was awesome.
What's the one thing that you wish you'd known back when you started your career that you know now, or advice for those out there that, you wish you'd known when you were younger?
I think the key thing is, if I were to sort of coin a quote, be a specialist, but don't specialize. I think treasury itself is a really highly technical and often external facing function. And from my perspective, it's kind of easier to branch out of treasury than it is to branch into treasury, given how specialized it is. And it's also relatively easy to jump from one treasury to another. But if you do have career aspirations to become a CEO or a CFO or take on more alongside treasury, I think it's important to sort of extend yourself outside of pure treasury. So too often I hear the treasury types getting stuck or pigeonholed in treasury because they haven't wanted to extend themselves, thinking it's just not their job to do things outside of treasury, or because they haven't been given the opportunity to take on more responsibility. And I think it's really, really important to develop sort of a more broad ranging set of skills and experiences, just making sure that you have the skills and capability to demonstrate you can add value across the broader organization outside of treasury. And I think that's a key part of the formula to sort of helping grow up and out of treasury, if that's what's on your mind or if that's part of your objectives.
For sure. And I mean, it's an interesting one because a lot of people, once you're bitten by the treasury bug, they don't want to leave. So it's not everyone that wants to make that broader move, is it?
Exactly. So yeah, it's up to the individual. Like I love going out there and speaking to investors and issuing bonds and establishing loans. I love that. But what has come to mind is that it's not all treasury if you don't want it to be all treasury. And it's important not to leave your development too late if you do want to step out of treasury. Otherwise, it might be a lot harder.
What do you think makes a successful treasurer in the eyes of the CFO, the CEO, and the board?
A few things. I think one is a successful treasurer really needs to be a strategic thinker. Treasurers really need to have a clear long-term vision in managing their balance sheets, especially given sometimes in treasury change happens incrementally. So for example, at Sydney Airport, we had a goal of de-risking our balance sheet by spreading, lengthening and diversifying our debt maturity profile. And so over a number of years, that's what we did, having that strategic long-term vision by tapping a number of new bond markets. So, if you go back to 2009, we only had Australian debt capital market bonds and loans outstanding. But over a number of years, we added a couple of USPP bonds, 4 144A bonds, 2 Euro bonds, a Canadian bond. And we've also more recently issued 2 USPP transactions that involved issuing debt for up to 30 years in tenor. And so having that long-term vision was required in shaping that balance sheet. These things don't happen overnight, and they also don't happen if you don't think forward about things. So strategic thinking is important. The second thing is having a proactive attitude. So treasurers as risk managers always, again, need to think ahead. What we've seen during the coronavirus pandemic in looking at some peer transactions is that many of our peers, not all of them, but many of them were effectively forced into adding to their liquidity positions during the most volatile time in the market. Significant spikes in margins, not the best cost of debt that they could have gotten if things were more stable. So I guess a treasurer needs to be proactive about things and always be prepared to capitalize and move fast on particular opportunities, especially during those periods of volatility, and not put themselves in a reactive position where they're forced to do something. I think that's another thing that the CFO and the board like. I mean, communication skills. Treasury is a really technical area, which means that people more often than not don't really understand what your strategies, products, and processes are. So a successful treasurer really needs to be able to present and explain complex information in a clear and concise manner, whether written or verbal. A treasurer needs to help people connect the dots, not force them to do that themselves. And relationship skills is another thing. Now, whether it be investing cash or issuing debt, solid negotiation or influencing skills is a big differentiator. Also, as a gatekeeper of funding internally, strong relationships will really make sure that capital is allocated to their best possible use, rather than put into projects that are probably suboptimal, for example. And the last thing is technical skills. Being a treasurer doesn't mean you can leave the spreadsheets behind. There are often times where you need to deep dive into models and spreadsheets and conduct some desktop analysis to help make quick decisions, or to sense check more complicated analysis to make sure that the decision a treasurer is making is really effective and really accurate and has a really sound basis. I think those are the key things.
What do you think, what do you look for when you're hiring in your direct hires within your team, Michael?
Yeah, I would say a few things. I mean, one is really, really strong technical skills. For better or for worse, I guess in Treasury, presentations and spreadsheets help make the world go round. So the ability to create and maintain really clear, really structured and accurate presentations with great attention to detail is fundamental, especially because, Treasury analysts and Treasury managers really need to deal with and convey quite complex information. So strong technical skills. The other one is a really proactive and improvement-based mindset. So always approaching a task with a goal to deliver something above and beyond is what a goal of delivering something above and beyond what is expected is what I'm all about. So in addition to in addition to finding ways to improve the quality and accuracy and speed of a task is what I look for in a Treasury analyst or manager. And it's what I call the X factors that some people don't really have on their wish list. Another thing is an organized and an autonomous mindset. So Treasury as a critical business function often comprises teams that are really, really small, 2, 3, 4 people. And so that's particularly important to manage, just given the high level of responsibility required working in Treasury. So the ability to really stay organized, to take tasks and just drive them to completion, to make sure that inboxes are managed really well, information's filed away, people are keeping to-do lists. Those are the little things that I look for in a good Treasury hire. And finally, problem-solving capability. So the ability to self-start on really unfamiliar and complex tasks with not much guidance is something that kind of might sound like a given, but I think it's often taken for granted. And when given a problem, although it's hard to assess, when given a problem, what I'd like to sort of see some sort of evidence of when recruiting is that an individual has the capability of actually coming back with a recommendation or a solution rather than presenting 5 new problems that need to be solved themselves. So I think those are the key.
Yeah, super important. I agree. Now, Michael, you obviously attained the role of treasurer at a very young age. Have mentors been something that you've leaned upon or used throughout your career? And what's your advice around that for listeners?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't had any formal mentors in my career, but I did have a few role models sort of shape my working style as I, transitioned from a treasury manager to treasurer. And I think my mentors, both being there's two main role models of mine, both my previous managers. They sort of taught me, or at least demonstrated to me a few key things. They're a bit controversial, but I guess it's best mentioning. I guess one of the things is let your work do the talking. So whether at an investment bank or at a corporate, my role models have shown real success in just leaving perception management at the door, walking the walk and not talking the talk. They're very much no-nonsense characters. And so as a result, my working style has been molded around that sort of mantra. So just focusing on taking pride in my work, putting 100% effort in and not playing the game, so to speak, especially when it comes to career development. It's just letting your work do the talking. And then the other thing that they've sort of shown to me is the importance of leaving no stone unturned in conducting analysis. Yes, we live in a world where the 80-20 rule is the norm, where an effective strategy or a decision is kind of perceived as one that only considers 80% of what is needed. What my role models have taught me is not so much that, but to actually think about all the things that need to be known in order to make a decision, but maybe put an 80% focus on those rather than leaving a piece of the puzzle to one side and not addressing that. And so I looked at my role models there and I thought, well, they're really good decision makers and they can really make quick decisions, but really well-informed ones. And so they sort of taught me the benefits, or showed me the benefits in actually thinking rationally and logically around assessing all the pros and cons in making a particular strategic decision, not being overweight on one particular pro or overweight on one particular con to help push a project or idea over the line, but rather just be rational and think strategically and balance all the pros and cons, because it's that one con that you forget or that one pro that you don't mention that could see something, go haywire down the track in the future.
In terms of networking, Michael, what's been your strategy over your career? How have you approached it?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. I think in my mind, my approach has been just to get out there and just, put yourself out there. I think I've come across people that either don't want to network or aren't provided the opportunity to do so. And I guess for those that sort of don't want to network, I think they're missing out on an important part of career development, because it's not only an important way to build career and personal connections, but it's also an important way to stay updated and to exchange ideas and to collectively solve each other's problems. The Treasury space is quite transferable. I mean, people have similar problems to yourselves. So part of the networking thing is to, light just came off. Yeah, so part of networking is to really get out there and not only build connections, but to sort of, leverage off those to help solve each other's problems and exchange ideas and that sort of thing. Also, in terms of approach and a bit of advice, I guess, if you aren't provided the opportunity to network, just speak to your manager and get invited to external meetings. It's a bit of a tip. I think going to external meetings is a gateway to networking opportunities, and I think that's really important. But if you don't really have that opportunity, if you feel like you're sort of bound behind your desk, there's also industry groups like the Finance and Treasury Association that you can just join, and that'll help you start your networking. But just specifically in terms of approach, there are a few key things that I do. I try to listen and share experiences and offer to help, which goes back to the point that treasuries are quite similar in the problems that they face. I approach networking being professional but being myself. I'm overweight authenticity, and if you want to present yourself in a certain light, it's just too easy to spot, and doesn't really foster trust, especially when you're trying to develop connections. I personally try to develop meaningful connections. Being an introvert myself, I try to sort of develop one or two key connections with individuals, such that when I sort of walk into a networking opportunity, I'm not faced with that awkward task of introducing myself or reintroducing myself to someone that I've spoken to for a few seconds before. So I seek to develop a few more meaningful connections. It's not something that people often do, but I like to engage on all levels. So when it comes to networking opportunities, I see treasurers talking to their banks talking to their clients, senior executives talking to senior executives. I don't see a lot of mixing. And I think there's a bit of a miss there, because I think everyone has something to offer. So I try not to be strategic. I try to get to know not everyone, but people of all levels, because everyone's got their own experiences and things to offer. And in terms of approach, one thing I do is try to remember and use everyone's name. It surprisingly doesn't sound easy, but there's nothing more awkward going into a networking event or meeting someone for a second or third time, not knowing their name. So I try to make a conscious effort to remember people's names. That's a bit of a tip there as well.
Now, Michael, I've got something that I don't know if I've ever told you this before, but you actually are responsible for my podcast. Now, this is something that the listeners should know, but we were at a networking event together, and just what you described then, at that networking event, all of the established treasurers were chatting amongst each other that had all known each other for many, many years. You just made the step up to become treasurer at Sydney Airport, and you said to me, I just don't understand why these people don't mix more. I want to be over there chatting to the established treasurers. And I said to you, look, I talk to them all the time. What is it that you want to know? But in essence, that conversation and the realization that there wasn't that fostering of information up and down the chain is actually what led me to develop the podcast. So I've got a debt of gratitude to owe to you for this exact medium that we're chatting on today, because it was our conversation that sparked the light in my head that created the podcast.
That is awesome. I didn't know that. I can assure you times have changed. One example is, the airport treasurers do talk to each other all the time, exchange ideas. So things are definitely changing on that front, but that's awesome to hear that, our conversation sparked this podcast.
One last question for you. Technology is changing very rapidly, Michael. How do you see the role of the treasurer changing in coming years?
Yeah, I guess with tech advancements, I see even greater automation, not so much in the treasurer space, but in terms of treasury operations and the back office functions such as payments. But I guess for a treasurer, this sort of means that he or she can spend less time signing, verifying, and checking information, which provides more time to maybe focus on more of the front office type of tasks, engaging with investors, things where the payoff is greater, so to speak, or even take on opportunities outside of treasury. So having the treasurer develop a more broader skill set, just because they have more time with this automation. I do think the advancements will come through at a much slower pace than people are sort of expecting. And part of that, given my background in software engineering, part of that is like whenever I have treasury systems pitched to me, it's very much a one size fits all approach. And so whilst these systems are becoming more and more advanced, not all treasuries are the same. And some of these systems require a lot of customization, which means a lot of time and a lot of cost to actually have them doing the things that you want them to do. So I do think there are a bit of technological advancements will help create more time, but there are a lot of headwinds in seeing that come through at a much greater pace than people think.
Michael, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for your time today. I've really enjoyed our chat.
Awesome. Thanks, Simon. Chat soon.
Hello and welcome to the Treasury Talent Podcast. I'm your host, Simon Lynch. Today I'm joined on the podcast by Michael Momdijian. Michael is the treasurer at Sydney Airports. And a fun fact for all of you listeners out there, Michael is actually the person who gave me the idea to start the podcast in the first place. It's something that he didn't know until I told him today, but Michael is actually the person who is to thank for the concept of this podcast. So I hope you enjoy listening today, and you'll find out towards the end how that all came about.